My family never once celebrated my birthday, not once in 33 years. But every year on March 22nd, a gift arrived at my home. No name, no return address. On my 33rd birthday, the gifts stopped. Instead, I found myself standing in the middle of a crowded upscale Atlanta steakhouse, holding my coat while my sister pointed to a tiny table next to the kitchen swinging doors. "Go find another table," she said, her voice carrying over the clinking crystal. "This main table is for immediate family only." I looked at my mother and father. They simply looked away. I was 33 years old today, and once again they had forgotten. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain of being the outcast in your own family. You will want to hear exactly how I served them their final course. Growing up in our household meant learning your place early. My parents, Yvonne and Otis, made sure of it. While they poured every ounce of affection and financial support into my younger sister, Sasha, I was treated like an unpaid intern in my own home. Sasha was the golden child. She had the cheerleading trophies, the expensive tutors, and eventually the lavish wedding to Hunter. Hunter was a white corporate lawyer who looked at our family like an amusing charity project, though he happily benefited from my parents draining their savings to fund his law firm's startup. I, on the other hand, was the quiet workhorse. I paid my own way through state college by working late shifts, eventually fighting my way up to become a strategic financial consultant. They thought I was a struggling mid-level accountant living in a shared rental. I never corrected them. Tonight was supposed to be a family dinner at Chop's Lobster Bar, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Buckhead. The occasion was not my birthday. It was a celebration for Sasha. She had just leased a brand new Porsche SUV, ironically using a loan she secured, because I quietly co-signed for it through a shell company she knew nothing about. I arrived 5 minutes late. I had just closed a massive merger for a client, and the Atlanta traffic was brutal. The hostess led me to the private dining alcove where my family was already seated. The table was lavishly decorated with champagne flutes and seafood towers. Yvonne and Otis were beaming at Sasha. Hunter was holding court, telling a loud story about his latest court case. I approached the table exhausted but willing to put on a good face for the evening. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Hunter announced. He leaned back in his leather chair, looking me up and down. He smirked. "Still wearing that cheap vintage coat, Jordan. You know, if you are struggling to make ends meet, I could probably hire you to file papers at my office. Minimum wage, of course, but it beats whatever you are doing now." My parents chuckled. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but I kept my voice perfectly level. "The coat is a custom wool blend, Hunter, and I am doing just fine." I pulled out the empty chair at the end of the table. As my hand touched the mahogany wood, Sasha slammed her champagne glass down. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "I am sitting down," I replied. "No, you are not," Sasha said. She gestured around the table. "There are only 6 chairs here. Hunter and I, Mom and Dad and Hunter's parents are joining us in a few minutes. We do not have room for you at the main table. This is for immediate family." The words hung in the air. Immediate family. I looked at my mother Yvonne, waiting for her to intervene. Instead, she took a slow sip of her water and sighed. "Do not make a scene, Jordan," my mother said. "You were late anyway. Just go ask the hostess to seat you somewhere else. You can come over and toast with us when the dessert arrives." I stood frozen. The sheer audacity of their cruelty was not new, but tonight it felt different. It was March 22nd. I had spent the entire day in boardroom meetings silently waiting for a text message or a call, just a simple happy birthday. Nothing. And now I was being banished from a table I was invited to, entirely replaced by my brother-in-law's parents. I looked at Hunter, who was grinning like he had just won a prize. I looked at Sasha, her eyes practically begging me to throw a tantrum so she could play the victim. Instead, I slowly took my hand off the chair. I nodded once, turned around, and walked back toward the hostess stand. They sat me at a tiny two-top table right next to the kitchen swinging doors. Every time a waiter rushed past, a blast of hot air and the smell of frying oil hit my face. I ordered a glass of tap water and a side salad. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the main table. I watched them laugh. I watched them toast to Sasha's new car. I watched them act like a perfect, loving family, completely unbothered by the daughters sitting alone in the shadows. I opened my purse and pulled out my phone. The screen was blank, no messages. For the past 32 years, without fail, a mysterious package would arrive on my doorstep on the morning of March 22nd. Sometimes it was a rare book. Sometimes it was a piece of antique jewelry. There was never a note, only a small card bearing the date. It was the only tangible proof I had that someone somewhere actually cared that I was born. But today, for the first time in my life, nothing arrived. The mailbox had been empty. The concierge had no packages. I sat there in the noisy restaurant watching my family celebrate a car lease while ignoring my existence. The absence of that anonymous gift felt like a heavy stone in my stomach. Something was wrong. The silence from my mysterious benefactor felt loud, almost deafening. I took a sip of my water, my mind racing. I did not know it yet, but the reason the gift had not arrived was not because I had been forgotten. It was because the sender was finally ready to deliver the truth in person. And that truth was about to tear this entire family apart. For the next 2 hours, I sat at my tiny overflow table and watched my family gorge themselves. They ordered Wagyu beef carpaccio and butter-poached lobster tails. They ordered 3 bottles of vintage wine that the sommelier had to carefully decant at the table. Sasha laughed so loudly that other diners turned to look, but my parents just beamed at her with absolute adoration. Hunter commanded the conversation, bragging about the bonus he was expecting from his law firm. He was a junior partner, but he spoke as if his name was already on the building. Through it all, not a single person looked over at my corner. Not once did anyone ask how my food was or if I wanted to join them for a toast. The kitchen doors swung open and shut, hitting my chair every few minutes. My side salad was completely wilted by the time they ordered dessert. A massive sparkler candle was brought out, stuck into a towering chocolate cake. They all leaned in for a picture. "Say, new car!" Sasha yelled, and the flash went off. I sat quietly in the shadows, blending into the background, just as I had been taught to do my entire life. Eventually, the plates were cleared, and the server brought out the heavy leather checkbook. He placed it in the center of the main table. I watched Hunter look at the bill. His arrogant smile slipped for a fraction of a second. He nudged Otis and slid the folder toward him. Otis picked up the receipt, cleared his throat loudly, and handed it to Yvonne. My mother let out a dramatic sigh. She smoothed down her silk blouse, picked up the leather folder, and began the long walk over to my tiny table. She stood over me, blocking the light from the chandelier. She dropped the heavy leather booklet onto my table right next to my empty water glass. She did not even try to look apologetic. "You know, Jordan," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "We were just talking about how well you seem to be doing lately. And since you are single with no kids to worry about, it would be a lovely gesture for you to treat your sister tonight. It is her special day after all, and we are all family." I slowly opened the leather folder. The grand total stared back at me in bold black ink. $4,500. They had practically ordered half the menu. My side salad and tap water cost exactly $14. I looked up at my mother. "Are you asking me to pay for a dinner I was not allowed to sit at?" I asked quietly. Her jaw tightened and her eyes flashed with irritation. "Do not be dramatic, Jordan," she snapped, crossing her arms. "It is just money. We housed you and fed you for 18 years. The least you can do is show some gratitude when your sister achieves a milestone. You have no real responsibilities anyway." From across the room, Hunter noticed the tense exchange. He stood up and shouted over the dining room, "Having trouble finding your purse, Jordan? We can chip in for your salad if you need us to." Sasha giggled and leaned her head on his shoulder. I did not argue. I did not cry. I had spent a lifetime building an armor so thick that their insults could no longer pierce my skin. I calmly reached into my tote bag. I bypassed the standard bank debit card they assumed I used to scrape by. Instead, I pulled out a worn leather journal. It looked like a cheap notebook from a local drugstore, the kind a struggling student might carry. But tucked safely inside the back cover was a heavy black metal card. It was an invitation only account reserved for high net worth individuals, the kind of card that could buy a house in a single swipe. I pulled the metal card out and placed it onto the silver tray. It made a solid, heavy clink sound against the metal. Hunter, who had wandered over to our side of the room to grab a toothpick from the wait station, paused. He looked down at the tray. He squinted at the dark metal and then burst into a loud, obnoxious laugh. "Are you kidding me?" Hunter said, pointing at the tray. "A fake black card. That is absolutely hilarious, Jordan. What did you order that off the internet to make yourself feel better about living in a cramped rental?" He turned back toward the main table and yelled, "Hey babe, your sister brought a prop to dinner to pretend she is rich." I did not say a single word. I simply looked up and nodded at the waiter, who was standing uncomfortably nearby. The waiter took the tray and hurried away toward the register. Hunter was still chuckling, shaking his head and leaning against the wall. "You are going to be so embarrassed when that gets declined," he muttered, crossing his arms to wait for the show. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. He did not look embarrassed, and he did not bring a declined slip. Instead, he looked deeply respectful, almost nervous. He handed me the receipt and a silver pen, bowing his head slightly as he did. "Thank you very much for your patronage, madam," he said softly. Hunter's laugh died instantly in his throat. He stared hard at the printed receipt, desperately looking for the word declined. But all he saw was a long string of zeros and the word approved printed clearly at the bottom. His face flushed a deep, ugly red. Yvonne stared at the heavy metal card as I calmly tucked it back into my worn journal. "How did you get that kind of credit limit?" she asked, her voice suddenly devoid of its usual arrogant edge. I stood up and slid my arms into my custom wool coat. "I work hard, Mother," I replied flatly, not giving her another inch of information. I looked past her at Sasha, who was suddenly glaring at me from the main table, furious that the attention had shifted away from her. "Happy car lease, Sasha?" I said loudly enough for their entire table to hear. "Enjoy the ride." I turned my back on them and walked away, feeling the weight of their confused and angry stares burning into me. As I walked through the grand mahogany doors of the restaurant, stepping out into the cool Atlanta night, my phone vibrated intensely in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from my mother demanding an explanation. Instead, it was a direct message from the private concierge of my luxury penthouse building. The message read, "Ms. Vance, I apologize for messaging you so late. There is a woman waiting in the private lobby for you. I told her you were not expecting guests, but she absolutely refused to leave. She asked me to tell you that she is 33 years late." I stopped dead in my tracks on the cold concrete sidewalk. The valet asked if I needed him to pull my car around, but I waved him off, unable to speak. 33 years late. Today was my 33rd birthday. The missing anonymous gift. The timing. Suddenly everything clicked together in my mind. My heart began to pound heavily against my ribs. I typed back a rapid reply, telling him I was on my way right now. I flagged down a black car, leaving my stunned family sitting in the restaurant with their fully paid bill and their bruised egos. The dinner was finally over, but the real reckoning was just about to begin. The black car pulled up to the sleek glass facade of the towering high-rise in Midtown Atlanta. My family genuinely believed I lived in a run-down walk-up with 3 roommates somewhere on the outskirts of the city. They never visited, they never asked. So they had no idea that I actually owned the top-floor penthouse, a sprawling sanctuary overlooking the entire skyline. I walked past the security desk. The night manager, David, gave me a sympathetic nod. "She is still up there," he said quietly. I thanked him and walked toward the private elevator lobby. I stepped into the dedicated lift and pressed my thumb to the biometric scanner. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a steady drumbeat of anxiety and anticipation. The doors glided open to my private foyer. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, was a woman I had never seen before. She turned around as I stepped out. She was striking. Perhaps in her late 60s, wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. Her silver hair was pulled back into an elegant twist, and her eyes held a sharp intelligence that immediately demanded respect. She did not look like someone who had come to apologize for being late. She looked like someone who had come to collect a heavy debt. "You must be Jordan," she said, her voice smooth and authoritative. "I am Elena. I have been looking forward to this exact moment for a very long time." I looked at her empty hands. "Where is the box?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Every year there is a box." Elena offered a small, sad smile. "The boxes were breadcrumbs, Jordan. Just a way to remind you that you existed and that someone was watching over you. But you are 33 today. The trust has fully matured. There are no more boxes. Today you get the truth." She walked over to the marble console table and picked up a worn leather briefcase. She snapped the brass locks open and withdrew a thick manila envelope. It looked old. The edges were frayed and the paper was yellowing. She held it out to me. I hesitated before taking it. "What is this?" I asked. My hands were trembling slightly. The heavy black card in my pocket suddenly felt weightless compared to the gravity in this room. "I am the senior partner at a private wealth management firm," Elena explained, keeping her eyes locked on mine. "And for the past 33 years, I have been the sole executor of a shadow trust established the day you were born. That envelope contains a letter from the man who created it." I slowly opened the flap. Inside was a handwritten letter. The ink was faded, but the bold, sweeping handwriting was perfectly legible. "To my dearest daughter," it began. I stopped reading and looked up. "Yvonne is my mother," I said defensively, though the words felt hollow on my tongue. Elena shook her head slowly. "Yvonne and Otis are not your biological parents, Jordan. They never were." I looked back down at the letter. The man who wrote it introduced himself as Silas Harrison. He was one of the early pioneers of the tech boom in the late 80s. He was brilliant, but his personal life was complicated. According to the letter, my biological mother had died during childbirth, and Silas was deeply embroiled in a vicious corporate takeover that threatened his safety and his fortune. He knew his enemies would use his newborn daughter against him. So he made a desperate choice. He found a young married couple through a private agency, a couple who looked respectable on paper. Yvonne and Otis. He paid them an astronomical sum to legally adopt you, change your last name, and raise you far away from his world," Elena said, stepping closer. "He wanted you to have a normal, quiet life until it was safe. He died of a sudden heart attack 2 years later before he could ever come back for you. But he made sure I was appointed to watch over your trust until you were ready." I read the rest of the letter. Silas poured out his love, his regret, and his hopes for my future. He promised that although he could not be there to hold me, he had provided everything I would ever need to live a life of comfort and privilege. A cold, sickening realization began to wash over me. I thought of the cramped blue bedroom my mother forced me to sleep in. I thought of the nights I spent scrubbing floors at a diner to pay for community college textbooks. I thought of Sasha, the golden child, getting private tutors, designer clothes, and a brand new car today. I looked at Elena, the paper shaking in my hands. If he provided for me, I asked, my voice cracking, where did it go? Why did they treat me like a burden? Elena's sharp eyes softened with pity. She reached back into her briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound ledger. "Silas left a substantial monthly stipend for your care and upbringing," she said. $20,000 a month, paid directly to Yvonne and Otis for 33 years. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. $20,000 a month, every single month since the day I was born. My parents had treated me like an unwanted parasite, constantly reminding me how much I cost them, how grateful I should be for the scraps they threw my way. And all the while they were cashing checks meant for my well-being. They used my biological father's money to build their perfect life, to buy Sasha's love, to fund Hunter's law degree. They had stolen my childhood, my inheritance, and my sanity. "They never loved me," I whispered, dropping the letter onto the marble table. "They just kept me around to keep the money flowing." Elena nodded, her expression hardening. "That is correct. They viewed you as a paycheck, a highly lucrative ward of the state. But the monthly stipends were only a fraction of the Shadow Trust, Jordan. Now that you are 33, the main principal of the estate belongs to you. You are the sole heir to the Harrison fortune. I felt a profound sense of grief colliding with an intense, burning rage. The dinner tonight, the humiliation, the constant belittling, it all made sense now. I was never a sister or a daughter. I was an asset they were exploiting. Elena placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. We have a lot of work to do, Jordan, because Yvonne and Otis know the stipend stopped today. And they have been making very desperate moves to access the main trust account before you ever found out it existed. They think they can take it all. I looked out the window at the city I had conquered on my own. They took my past, I said softly, my voice turning to steel. But they are not taking my future. Elena closed the heavy leather briefcase and looked at me with a steady, piercing gaze. She explained that the $20,000 a month was never intended to be a flat fee for their silence. It was specifically earmarked for my education, my health care, and my comfort. Silas Harrison wanted his daughter to have the best tutors, the finest clothes, and a life completely free of financial stress. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat as the reality of her words washed over me. I told Elena about the time I broke my arm falling off the playground equipment when I was 12 years old. Yvonne refused to take me to the hospital for 2 straight days, claiming we could not afford the emergency room copay. She wrapped my swollen arm in a tight ace bandage and told me to stop crying because I was giving her a migraine. When the pain became unbearable and my arm turned an unnatural shade of purple, a school nurse finally called child services. Yvonne lied to the social worker and said I fell off a bike that morning and she was just trying to treat it at home. She played the victim perfectly, weeping about how hard it was to raise a clumsy child, all while pulling in $20,000 of my money that very same month. Elena flipped to a specific page in the thick financial ledger. She pointed a manicured finger to a series of massive cash withdrawals dated right around my 18th birthday. It was the exact same year Otis suddenly opened his third luxury car dealership after bankrupting the first 2. I remembered sitting at our cramped kitchen table begging them to co-sign a small student loan so I could go to the state university. Otis had looked me dead in the eye and told me I was not smart enough for a 4-year college and that they had absolutely no money to waste on a bad investment. He took my trust money to lease a massive glass showroom full of imported cars that he drove straight into the ground 2 years later. Meanwhile, I worked 3 exhausting jobs just to survive. I scrubbed greasy diner counters at dawn, I tutored spoiled high school kids in the afternoon, and I cleaned corporate office buildings late at night just to pay for my community college classes. I wore thrift store clothes and ate instant noodles while they lived like royalty on my stolen inheritance. The ledger revealed even more sickening details the further down the page I looked. There was a massive lump sum withdrawal marked as a wedding gift exactly 4 years ago. The number matched the exact amount of Hunter's law school debt down to the final cent. Yvonne and Otis had secretly paid off his massive student loans to buy his loyalty and secure Sasha's marriage. They wanted a white corporate lawyer in the family to elevate their social status and make them look respectable to their country club friends. They used my biological father's money to buy a son-in-law who spent the entire evening tonight mocking my vintage coat and my career. Every luxury Sasha ever flaunted, her designer bags, her month-long European vacations, her massive down payment on her sprawling suburban house, it was all funded by the blood, sweat, and legacy of a father I never even got to meet. I felt the profound shock hardening into something cold and sharp inside my chest. I asked Elena what happens now that the trust has matured today, because I am officially 33. The monthly stipends have legally stopped. I asked her if my family knew that the money had been permanently cut off. Elena nodded slowly. She told me that Yvonne and Otis received a formal legal notice from the Shadow Trust administrators last week, informing them that the monthly deposits would cease on March 22nd. That explained the bizarre underlying tension at the restaurant tonight. That explained why Yvonne was so desperate to humiliate me and make me pay the $4,000 dinner bill. They are panicking because the endless well of free cash has finally run dry, and they have absolutely zero actual income to sustain their extravagant lifestyle. But Elena was not finished delivering the bad news. She pulled one last document from her folder and slid it across the cold marble table. She told me that the main principle of the Harrison fortune is locked down tight and requires my biometric signature and physical presence to access. However, Silas Harrison set up a temporary transition reserve account before he died. It holds exactly $5 million meant to help me adjust to my new wealth before the full estate is formally handed over. Elena looked at me with absolute dead seriousness. She told me that for the past 3 weeks, Yvonne and Otis have been secretly filing legal paperwork to declare me financially incompetent. They are trying to establish a sudden medical power of attorney over me. I stared at the thick stack of legal filings in absolute horror and disbelief. I read Hunter's name listed as the lead attorney of record on the documents. They are all working together to destroy me. Hunter is using his law firm resources to build a completely fabricated case, claiming that I suffer from severe mental instability and that I am incapable of managing my own assets. They are planning to drain that $5 million reserve account before I even figure out it exists. They want to steal the transition fund and leave me locked in a brutal legal battle for my own sanity. Elena warned me that Hunter is aggressive and dangerous. He is a master at manipulating the family court system, and he has already scheduled an emergency hearing for next Wednesday to freeze my personal bank accounts and force me into a restrictive conservatorship. They think I am weak, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet whisper. They think I am the same frightened little girl who used to hide in her bedroom closet to escape their screaming matches. They think because I never fought back that I do not know how to fight. Elena smiled a small, proud smile. She told me she has watched me build my corporate career from absolutely nothing. She knows I am a brilliant financial strategist who tears apart corrupt companies and hostile takeovers for a living. She told me it is time to apply those ruthless skills to my own toxic family. I looked down at the heavy black metal card sitting on the table next to the 33-year-old letter from my real father. I have spent my entire adult life trying to earn a single scrap of genuine love from people who were quite literally paid to tolerate my existence. I sacrificed my youth, my peace of mind, and my self-esteem to keep them happy, while they secretly bled my legacy dry. They want to play a legal game of chess for $5 million and my freedom. I am going to let them think they are winning right up until the exact moment I take absolutely everything from them. I looked at Elena and told her to prepare the forensic accountants and assemble her legal team. The 33-year embezzlement was officially over, and it was time for my fake family to pay the ultimate price. The sun had barely crested the Atlanta skyline the next morning when the private elevator to my penthouse chimed unexpectedly. I had not slept a single wink. I had spent the entire night drinking black coffee and going through every single page of the financial ledger Elena left behind, tracing 33 years of theft. The heavy oak doors of my foyer swung open before I could even reach the intercom panel. Sasha and Hunter barged right in without a hint of hesitation. They did not look like the smug, celebrating couple from the steakhouse last night. They looked frantic, anxious, and desperate. I later learned they had slipped a crisp $100 bill to the morning shift doorman, claiming it was a family medical emergency just so they could bypass the guest registry and come straight up. Sasha stopped for a fraction of a second to look at the massive vaulted ceilings, the custom artwork, and the panoramic windows overlooking Midtown Atlanta. "Wow, your roommates really went all out on the living room decor," she muttered dismissively, completely unbothered by the invasion of privacy. She just assumed I was renting a tiny corner of someone else's luxurious apartment because the idea of me being successful was impossible for her to process. Hunter did not even bother looking around the beautiful space. He marched straight up to the kitchen island where I was standing holding my coffee mug. He slapped a thick stack of legal documents onto the pristine quartz countertop. "Listen, Jordan," he said, his voice clipped and demanding. "We do not have time for your usual difficult attitude today. The commercial lease on my new law office space requires a secondary guarantor with liquid assets, and since my parents are already tied up with the mortgage on Sasha's new house, you are going to co-sign this loan. He slid a heavy silver pen across the counter toward me. It was not a polite request. It was an aggressive order from a man who thought he owned me. I stared at the documents and then looked up at his face. The sheer audacity of this man was staggering. Less than 12 hours ago, he was publicly humiliating me in a five-star restaurant, mocking my coat and treating me like a peasant. Now he was standing in my kitchen, demanding I put my name on a $500,000 commercial lease because his own credit was completely overextended and useless. They were panicking just like Elena said they would. The Shadow Trust money had been officially cut off, and they were scrambling to secure lines of credit before their entire fake financial house of cards collapsed. I pushed the papers back across the counter with a single finger. "I am going to make some fresh coffee," I said calmly, turning my back on him. "I suggest you both take a deep breath and sit down because I am not signing anything before I read it end to end." Hunter scoffed loudly, muttering a string of insults about how I would not even understand the complex legal jargon anyway. While Hunter paced furiously around the kitchen complaining about how selfish and ungrateful I was being, Sasha decided she was bored with the conversation. She wandered down the long hallway toward the bedrooms looking for something to criticize. I let her go. I knew exactly what she was going to find at the end of that hall. A few moments later, a high-pitched shriek echoed from the master suite. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated outrage and shock. Hunter stopped his pacing immediately and we both walked quickly toward the hallway. Sasha was standing frozen in the middle of my massive custom-built walk-in closet. Her mouth was hanging wide open and her eyes were bulging out of her head as if she had just seen a ghost. She was staring at the glass display shelves, illuminated by soft, warm LED lighting. Sitting perfectly aligned on those shelves was my private collection of authentic Hermes bags. There were 3 Birkins and 2 rare Kelly bags, each one worth more than the luxury SUV she had just leased yesterday. Hanging neatly on the cedar racks next to them were rows of bespoke tailored suits from Milan and Paris. These were the clothes I wore to high-stakes board meetings to negotiate multi-million-dollar corporate mergers. The clothes I never wore around my fake family because they would have demanded I sell them to pay for their endless vacations. Sasha spun around to face me, her face contorted with an ugly mixture of extreme jealousy and deep disgust. "What is this, Jordan?" she screamed, pointing a shaking manicured finger at a rare crocodile skin Birkin sitting on the center pedestal. "Whose room is this? Are you sleeping with one of your rich roommates?" "This is my bedroom, Sasha," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly flat and emotionless. "And those are my bags." Sasha let out a loud, hysterical laugh that bounced off the closet walls. "Your bags!" she yelled, stepping closer to me. "Your bags. You are a mid-level numbers cruncher who wears cheap vintage coats and shops at discount stores. These bags cost $30,000 each." Hunter pushed past me into the closet, his eyes greedily scanning the designer labels and the expensive silk linings. His lawyer brain was working in overdrive trying to calculate the sheer retail value of everything sitting in the room. Suddenly, Sasha's face darkened with a malicious realization. She stormed right up to me, stopping mere inches from my face. "You are stealing," she hissed, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "That is the only way you could possibly afford any of this luxury. You are embezzling money from your corporate employer. You are stealing client trust funds. My God, Jordan, you are a common criminal." Hunter immediately jumped on her wild narrative. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and physically aggressive. "Are you completely out of your mind?" he barked, shaking my arm slightly. "If you are committing corporate fraud, you are going to drag this entire family down with you. The federal investigators will audit all of us. We will lose everything because of your stupid greed." The sheer irony of their accusations almost made me laugh out loud right there in the closet. They were standing inside my penthouse paid for by my own money, accusing me of the exact same horrific crime they had been committing against me for 33 consecutive years. They were the real embezzlers. They were the true frauds. I calmly looked down at Hunter's hand gripping my arm. "Take your hand off me." "Hunter," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave that made him flinch. He hesitated for a second before slowly letting go, but he did not back down from my personal space. Sasha was practically vibrating with uncontrollable rage. Her entire fragile identity was built entirely on being the rich, successful, beautiful sister. The sudden realization that I possessed things she could only dream of owning was completely shattering her ego into a million jagged pieces. "I'm calling Mom and Dad right now," Sasha threatened, pulling her phone out of her designer purse with shaking hands. "They need to come over here and see this immediately. They need to know what a lying thief you really are. You are going to sell every single one of these bags today to fund Hunter's law office loan, or we are calling the police and having you arrested for federal embezzlement right now." I watched her frantically dial the number, tears of angry frustration streaming down her perfectly made-up face. I did not try to stop her. I did not try to explain that the bags were bought with my own hard-earned corporate bonuses, or that I owned the entire luxury building we were currently standing in. I just stood there in the doorway of my beautiful closet, watching the golden child completely unravel before my eyes. "Call them," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "Tell them to hurry." It took exactly 22 minutes for my parents to arrive. I spent that time sitting at my kitchen island, drinking my coffee while Sasha paced the length of my hardwood floors, crying crocodile tears and typing furiously on her phone. Hunter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, aggressively tapping his foot and glaring at me as if I had personally offended his entire bloodline. When the private elevator doors finally slid open, Yvonne and Otis came charging into the foyer like a pair of angry bulls. They did not stop to admire the custom chandelier or the imported marble floors. Yvonne locked her eyes onto me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Sasha ran to our mother, immediately sobbing hysterically and pointing toward the bedroom hallway. "Mom, she is a criminal," Sasha wailed, burying her face in Yvonne's shoulder. "She has tens of thousands of dollars worth of stolen designer goods in her closet, and she refuses to help Hunter with his business loan." Yvonne pushed Sasha gently aside and marched straight up to where I was sitting. Before I could even set my coffee mug down on the quartz counter, she raised her hand and struck me hard across the left side of my face. The sharp crack of her palm connecting with my cheek echoed through the massive open-concept living room. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the blow. A hot, stinging pain radiated across my skin, and the metallic taste of blood bloomed on the inside of my cheek where my teeth had caught the flesh. "You disgusting, ungrateful burden!" Yvonne spat, her voice shaking with rage. Otis stood right behind her, crossing his arms over his chest, completely supporting the physical assault. "We opened our home to you. We put food in your mouth and clothes on your back. And this is how you repay us. By stealing from your company and hoarding luxury goods, while your sister is struggling to secure a simple commercial loan for her husband." I slowly turned my head back to face her. I did not touch my cheek. I did not shed a single tear. The little girl who used to cower in terror whenever Yvonne raised her voice was dead. In her place was a cold, calculating strategist who had just been handed the perfect opportunity to trap her enemies. I slid my right hand off the counter and slipped it into the deep pocket of my slacks. My thumb found the side button of my phone. I double-tapped it to activate the voice memo shortcut I had set up earlier that morning. A small vibration confirmed the device was now actively recording every single word spoken in the room. "I am not a thief, Yvonne," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "Everything in this penthouse belongs to me, and I paid for it with my own money." Hunter scoffed loudly from the window. "Do not lie to us, Jordan," he sneered. "You do not make enough money to afford one of those bags, let alone an entire closet full of them, plus this ridiculous apartment." You are going to sell every single item in that room today. The funds will be transferred to my business account to cover the loan guarantee. If you refuse, I am personally calling the federal authorities and handing you over for corporate embezzlement. I looked back at Yvonne, deliberately ignoring Hunter. She nodded in agreement, her eyes burning with greedy entitlement. You heard him, Yvonne demanded, pointing a sharp fingernail at my face. You are going to liquidate those bags right now. You owe this family everything you have. You owe your sister your full support. You have been nothing but a drain on our resources since the day we got stuck with you. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the recording capture the heavy silence in the room. I needed her to say it. I needed her to put the final nail in her own coffin on a crystal-clear audio file. Why do I owe you anything? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I scrubbed floors to pay for my own education. I moved out the moment I turned 18. You never paid for a single thing for me. Why do you feel so entitled to my money? Otis stepped forward, his face turning a deep shade of red. Do not talk back to your mother, he bellowed. You owe us because we gave you a life. We took you in when nobody else wanted you. I tilted my head, feigning confusion and hurt. You took me in because you loved me, or because you were forced to. I pushed, knowing exactly which button to press. You always hated me, Yvonne. You treated Sasha like a princess and you treated me like a stray dog. You were forced to feed. Why did you even keep me around if I was such a burden? The trap snapped shut beautifully. Yvonne completely lost whatever tiny fraction of self-control she had left. Her face contorted with ugly, vicious hatred. She stepped closer, screaming at the top of her lungs so loudly that the audio would be impossible to dispute in any court of law. We did not keep you around out of love, you stupid girl, Yvonne shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. We only took you in because we were paid to. We got $20,000 a month to put up with your pathetic existence. You think we actually wanted you. You think you are actually a part of this family. You are nothing but a walking paycheck. You owe us every breath you take because if it were not for that money, we would have left you to rot in an orphanage. The echo of her words bounced off the vaulted ceilings and slowly faded into a deafening silence. Sasha and Hunter suddenly froze. They looked at Yvonne, their expressions shifting from righteous anger to complete confusion. They had no idea what she was talking about. The golden child and the arrogant lawyer knew nothing about the shadow trust or the massive monthly stipends. Yvonne and Otis had kept the secret from everyone, so they would not have to share the wealth. I reached into my pocket and hit the button to stop the recording. The audio file saved itself securely to an encrypted cloud server. I pulled my hand out and placed it flat on the counter. A cold, victorious smile slowly spread across my face. Thank you, Yvonne, I said softly, the icy calm in my voice making Otis suddenly take a step back. I really appreciate you clarifying that for the record. Yvonne blinked, her chest heaving as the sheer weight of what she had just confessed in front of Sasha and Hunter began to sink in. She opened her mouth to speak, but the intercom on my wall buzzed sharply, cutting her off. It was the doorman downstairs, letting me know that my private security team had just arrived. The game was moving exactly according to my plan. I did not press the button to let the security team up just yet. I wanted to see exactly how far Hunter was willing to push this charade. Hunter stepped right in front of Yvonne, physically blocking her, as if he were bravely shielding his fragile mother-in-law from a dangerous predator. He puffed out his chest, straightening his expensive but poorly fitted tie, playing the ultimate white knight coming to the rescue of Sasha's family. He clearly believed that because I was a black woman who had always remained quiet in the background, I would simply crumble under the aggressive authority of a loud, arrogant white lawyer. Listen to me very carefully, Jordan, he said, his voice dripping with condescending authority. You are playing a very dangerous game and you are completely out of your league. My parents-in-law have been nothing but generous to you, and this is your sick way of seeking attention. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slammed it down onto the pristine quartz countertop right next to where my hand was resting. "What is this?" I asked, looking at the heavy linen paper sticking out of the flap. "That is a formal cease and desist order and a fully drafted civil lawsuit." Hunter sneered, leaning his weight onto the kitchen island to tower over me. "I drafted it myself this morning. It outlines your corporate fraud, your clear embezzlement of client funds to purchase these illicit luxury goods, and your coordinated financial abuse of this family." Sasha peeked out from behind Hunter's shoulder, a smug, satisfied smile returning to her face now that her husband was taking charge. "You are going to jail, Jordan?" she chimed in, her voice dripping with malice. "You are going to lose absolutely everything." Hunter held up a hand to silence his wife wanting all the glory for himself. "I have personal contacts at the IRS and the Federal Trade Commission, Jordan. I play golf with the compliance officers at your corporate firm. All it takes is one phone call from me and your bank accounts are permanently frozen. Your office is raided by federal agents, and you are walking out of your high-rise building in handcuffs. Your entire career will be completely over by noon today." I kept my face entirely blank, letting him think his loud intimidation tactics were working perfectly. "So what is your generous offer, Hunter?" I asked quietly. He smiled, a cold, predatory grin, revealing his perfectly whitened teeth. He tapped the thick legal document with his index finger. "Inside this envelope is a comprehensive asset transfer agreement. You are going to sign over the total legal rights to all of your savings accounts, your investment portfolios, and the physical property sitting in that closet. The assets will be transferred directly into a blind family trust that is managed exclusively by my law firm. We will liquidate the stolen goods to pay off the commercial loan I need, and the rest will be held in a secure escrow to compensate Yvonne and Otis for the severe emotional distress you have caused them this morning. If you sign it," Hunter continued, his voice oozing with arrogant pride, "I will personally make sure the federal authorities never look into your little embezzlement scheme. I will save you from federal prison because I am a generous man and because my beautiful wife asked me to show you mercy. But you have to sign it right now before your fake security team upstairs or whatever pathetic bluff you are running comes through that door." I slowly slid the document out of the envelope. The paper felt heavy and expensive. I flipped past the cover page and began scanning the dense legal paragraphs. Hunter scoffed, watching me read. "Do not bother trying to find a loophole, Jordan," he mocked, crossing his arms over his chest. "I am a junior partner at one of the most ruthless real estate and wealth management firms in the state of Georgia. I crafted this agreement with airtight legal precision. There is absolutely no way out for you, so just stop pretending you understand the terminology." He was so blindingly arrogant that he did not even realize what he had just done. As my eyes tracked down the third page of the asset transfer agreement, I had to force myself to bite the inside of my cheek to suppress a genuine smile. Hunter was not a brilliant legal mind. He was a desperate, greedy man rushing to secure cash to cover up his own failing finances and massive debt. In his frantic rush to draft this extortion document before sunrise, he had made a fatal, catastrophic error. He had explicitly listed his own law firm's private escrow account as the destination for my transferred assets, but he had not listed the firm's general client trust. He had listed a specific routing number, a routing number that my elite corporate finance background immediately recognized as a highly irregular commingled shadow account. By demanding that I transfer allegedly stolen corporate funds directly into his firm's private escrow to be washed and redistributed to his personal business loan, Hunter had just put in writing an undeniable intent to commit severe money laundering. And it got even better. On page 5 of his airtight document, he referenced my hidden illicit wealth as grounds for the family trust to seize my assets, claiming I was actively hiding inheritance money. He was legally attempting to blind trust the Harrison estate money, the $5 million transition reserve, without even knowing the exact legal name of the estate. He had just handed me a signed, dated, and legally binding extortion demand, printed clearly on his own law firm's official letterhead. He had just committed federal wire fraud and extortion, all wrapped up in a beautiful manila envelope. I looked up from the document, letting my shoulders slump slightly to pretend I was overwhelmed and defeated. Hunter was watching me like a hawk, waiting for me to break under his superior intellect. "This is a lot of complex legal jargon, Hunter," I said, my voice trembling just a fraction of an inch to sell the terrified performance. "If I sign this, you promise you will not call my firm or the police." Hunter puffed his chest out even further, his ego swelling to massive, uncontainable proportions. "I give you my word as an officer of the court," he said smoothly, adjusting his suit jacket. "Sign the paper, Jordan. It is the only way you walk away from this mess with your freedom." I looked at Yvonne, who was still breathing heavily from her recorded confession, and at Otis, who was grinning like he had just won the lottery. I looked at Sasha, who was practically vibrating with greed, imagining all my luxury bags belonging to her. They truly thought they had cornered me. They thought their brilliant white knight had just swooped in and outsmarted the quiet, obedient sister they had abused for decades. They had absolutely no idea that the piece of paper resting peacefully under my fingertips was the exact weapon I needed to have Hunter permanently disbarred and thrown into a federal penitentiary. I slowly reached across the court's counter and picked up the heavy silver pen. I pressed the heavy silver pen against the thick linen paper. Hunter leaned in, his eyes gleaming with greedy anticipation. Sasha was literally holding her breath. I signed my name at the bottom of the page using my standard everyday signature, not the specialized biometric authorization required to actually access the Harrison Estate Trust. "Here," I said, sliding the document back across the counter. "It is yours." Hunter snatched the paper up so fast he almost tore it. He checked the signature and grinned a massive triumphant smile. Yvonne let out a loud dramatic sigh of relief, and Otis patted Hunter on the back like he had just won the Super Bowl. I told them my security team was coming up the elevator and that they needed to leave my apartment immediately. Hunter puffed out his chest and told me I had exactly 48 hours to vacate the penthouse since it now belonged to the family trust. I did not argue with him. I just stood there and watched them pile into the private elevator, clutching their extortion document like it was a winning lottery ticket. An hour later, I was sitting in a high-security boardroom on the top floor of Elena's private wealth management firm. The walls were soundproof glass overlooking the bustling Atlanta financial district, and the massive mahogany table was covered in secure encrypted laptops. Elena sat at the head of the table sipping an espresso. Flanking her were three of her top forensic accountants, all wearing sharp suits and entirely serious expressions. I handed Elena a scanned copy of the asset transfer agreement Hunter had just forced me to sign. She put on her reading glasses and silently scanned the document. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. She slid the paper toward the lead accountant, a quiet, highly focused man named Arthur. "Run this routing number," Elena instructed, tapping the page. Arthur typed furiously into his encrypted laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. The silence in the boardroom was thick with anticipation. It only took him 3 minutes to crack the outer shell of the account routing information and cross-reference it with the state banking database. "Mr. Hunter is not a very smart man," Arthur said quietly, turning his laptop screen so Elena and I could see the data blocks. "This routing number does not lead to a blind family trust. It leads directly into the primary client escrow account for his real estate law firm. But there is a massive problem with this account." Arthur brought up a secondary screen showing a complex web of international wire transfers and internal bank movements. "The escrow account is bleeding," Arthur explained, pointing to a series of red numbers. "Over the past 18 months, someone has been systematically siphoning funds out of the client trust and routing them through a series of Shell LLC accounts." I leaned forward, looking closely at the destination names. One of the LLC companies was registered to a luxury car dealership, the exact dealership where Sasha leased her new Porsche yesterday afternoon. Another massive transfer went to a high-end custom home builder covering the down payment on Sasha's new suburban mansion. Another went directly to a luxury travel agency that booked Sasha's month-long European vacation last summer. The reality of the situation hit me like a speeding freight train. Hunter was not just broke. He was actively stealing millions of dollars from his own law firm's clients, to fund my sister's lavish lifestyle. Hunter was desperate. His massive theft was about to be discovered by his firm because of an upcoming quarterly audit scheduled for the end of the month. He needed a massive influx of cash to replace the stolen escrow funds before his senior partners realized the money was entirely missing. That is why he drafted this extortion document so quickly this morning. He planned to take my savings, liquidate my luxury bags, and dump the cash directly into the escrow account to cover his tracks. He was using me as his get-out-of-jail-free card to save his own miserable career. Elena took off her glasses and folded her hands neatly on the table. "We have enough evidence right here to have him arrested before dinner," she said, her voice completely calm and lethal. "We can send this routing trace to the FBI and to the State Bar Association right now. Hunter will be disbarred and in federal custody by tonight. Yvonne and Otis will be left with absolutely nothing when the authorities seize their assets to pay back the stolen funds." "Do you want me to make the call, Jordan?" I looked at the web of stolen money glowing on the computer screen. I thought about the way Yvonne slapped me across the face this morning. I thought about Otis standing there telling me I was just a paycheck to them. I thought about Hunter mocking my clothes in the restaurant and Sasha screaming at me trying to steal my things. Destroying them quietly in a private legal settlement was not enough. They had spent 33 years humiliating me in public. They had spent 33 years pretending to be the perfect wealthy family while treating me like dirt on the bottom of their shoes. I wanted them to lose everything in front of the exact high society audience they were so desperate to impress. "No," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "Do not call the authorities yet. If we arrest him now, Yvonne and Otis will just play the innocent victims. They will cry to all their country club friends and claim they had no idea Hunter was a criminal. They will spin a tragic story about how they were deceived by their evil son-in-law. I want all of them to go down together. I want them fully exposed with nowhere to hide." Elena raised an eyebrow, her eyes gleaming with absolute approval. "So what is your strategy?" she asked. I told her I was going to play the victim perfectly. I was going to pack my bags and let them legally evict me from my own penthouse. I was going to let Hunter take the signed document to his bank and actively attempt the wire transfers. I was going to give them every single inch of rope they needed to weave their own nooses. I knew Hunter was too arrogant and greedy to just take my bags and walk away. He would try to access the decoy bank accounts I had linked to my fake corporate identity. And the exact moment he tried to pull that money using the forged legal documents, he would trigger a federal wire fraud alert that not even his senior partners could ever cover up. Elena instructed the accountants to set up the decoy accounts and monitor every single digital move Hunter made from this moment forward. She promised me that the trap would be completely inescapable once he took the bait. I stood up from the boardroom table feeling a strange sense of total peace wash over me. For my entire life, I had been fighting for tiny scraps of validation from a family that viewed me as a human ATM. Now I was the master of the board, and they were just pawns marching blindly toward their own execution. I thanked Elena and walked out of the high-security building. It was time to go back to the penthouse and put on the performance of a lifetime. It was time to pack my bags and surrender. I rode the private elevator back up to my penthouse, for what would be the last time in a very short while. Walking through the heavy oak doors, I pulled two simple canvas suitcases from the guest bedroom closet. I deliberately left every single designer suit and every authentic Hermes bag exactly where they were sitting in the master suite. I needed Sasha to feel like she had won the ultimate prize. I packed only my oldest sweaters, some basic toiletries, and the worn leather journal that held my black metal card. I wanted to look exactly like the pathetic, broken woman they all believed me to be. I was just zipping up the second suitcase when the elevator chimed again. They had not even waited the full 48 hours Hunter promised. Sasha and Hunter marched into the foyer, followed closely by Yvonne and Otis. Yvonne actually had a strange man in a utility shirt walking behind her carrying a heavy metal toolbox. "Look at you finally doing what you are told," Sasha mocked. crossing her arms as she surveyed my packed bags. She pulled out her phone and immediately flipped the camera around to face us. She snapped a picture of me standing next to my modest luggage with the luxurious living room in the background. Within seconds, she was typing a lengthy caption about how the broke loser of the family was finally getting kicked out onto the street where she belonged. She narrated her typing out loud, making sure I heard every cruel word she posted to her thousands of followers. She tagged the location of my luxury building, adding a laughing emoji next to my name. Hunter walked over and held his hand out, palm up. His arrogant face was flushed with the thrill of his fabricated victory. "Hand over the keys, Jordan," he demanded, trying to sound like a tough corporate boss taking over a rival firm. "The legal asset transfer is in full effect as of this morning. This property and everything in it now belongs to the family trust. You have 5 minutes to take your garbage and leave before I have you escorted out by the building security." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key fob. I dropped it into his open hand, letting my shoulders slump forward to give them the defeated posture they were so desperately craving. I did not say a single word in my defense. Yvonne clapped her hands together like an excited child arriving at an amusement park. "Go ahead and change them all," she ordered the man with the toolbox, pointing toward the massive front entry. "I want new high-security deadbolts on the front doors, and I want a new digital code programmed for the private elevator access." She turned to look at me, her face glowing with vicious satisfaction. "You are never stepping foot in this building again, Jordan," she said, her voice thick with absolute venom. "This penthouse is family property now, and you are officially no longer family. We are taking back everything you stole from us." Otis stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city skyline, completely ignoring my departure as if I were a stray dog. They were finally dropping off at the pound. I grabbed the handles of my 2 canvas suitcases and walked toward the back hallway that led to the service elevator. I did not look back. I let the heavy metal doors close in my face, listening to the sound of Sasha squealing with delight as she ran down the hall toward the master closet to claim her stolen designer prizes. They were celebrating a victory that was entirely built on a foundation of gasoline, and they had just handed me the match. 15 minutes later, my private black car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Four Seasons Hotel in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The valet rushed to open my door, looking slightly confused by my cheap canvas luggage, but immediately correcting his posture when I handed him a crisp $100 bill. I bypassed the main reception desk and went straight to the VIP concierge. I checked into the presidential suite under my secure corporate business account. The suite was a sprawling masterpiece of modern luxury with panoramic views of the city I had just left behind. Once I was safely inside the massive soundproof room, I ordered a bottle of vintage champagne and a plate of fresh strawberries from room service. I kicked off my shoes, sinking into the plush velvet sofa, and opened my encrypted laptop on the heavy mahogany coffee table. Elena had already sent me the secure tracking link built by her team of forensic accountants. I clicked the link and a complex dashboard filled the screen. I poured myself a glass of cold, bubbling champagne and watched the computer screen with intense focus. A small green light blinked rapidly on the dashboard. Hunter had wasted absolutely no time at all. Less than an hour after kicking me out of my own home, he was already sitting at my quartz kitchen island, using my stolen high-speed internet to log into the decoy bank accounts I had provided in his forged asset transfer agreement. I took a slow sip of my champagne, feeling the cold liquid coat my throat as I watched the numbers light up on the screen. He was bypassing the standard daily transfer limits using his fake legal authority as the trust manager. He was typing in the exact routing numbers for his law firm's private escrow account, just like he had promised he would. The bait was officially in the water and the shark had just taken a massive, blinding bite. I leaned back against the velvet cushions, watching the digital progress bar slowly fill up. Every single keystroke he made was being logged, recorded, and sent directly to a secure server waiting to be handed over to the federal authorities. My fake surrender was complete, and their real nightmare was just beginning. I sat perfectly still on the plush velvet sofa inside the Four Seasons presidential suite, watching the blinking cursor on my encrypted laptop screen. Hunter was moving extremely fast, but his speed made him reckless and sloppy. The decoy banking portal Elena and her forensic team had custom built was designed to look exactly like a standard high-yield corporate savings portfolio. In reality, it was a highly monitored digital honeypot. The account was pre-loaded with fake banking ledgers showing over $2 million in available liquid cash. The exact moment Hunter saw those massive numbers pop up on his screen, I knew his greedy lawyer brain completely short-circuited. He had already initiated the first wire transfer to cover the immediate missing funds in his law firm escrow account. But that was just the appetizer. A man like Hunter, who had spent his entire adult life leeching off others and pretending to be wealthy, was never going to stop at just breaking even. He wanted to steal enough to make himself completely untouchable. I watched intently as the digital tracking log showed him opening a secondary transaction window. He was typing in a staggering number, $500,000. But he was not routing this massive sum to his law firm client trust to cover his previous thefts. He was routing it directly into his own personal private checking account. He was trying to steal a cool $500,000 for himself right under the noses of his senior partners and my clueless family. The secure banking portal immediately prompted him for additional legal verification because the transfer amount was so astronomically high. The system clearly requested a certified power of attorney document to authorize the movement of funds. Hunter did not even hesitate to commit his next crime. The digital dashboard showed a PDF attachment being uploaded directly from my penthouse internet connection. He had actually taken the time to forge a complete power of attorney document, naming himself as the sole financial proxy for the family trust. He had forged my signature a second time and uploaded it to a federally insured banking platform. I took another slow sip of my vintage champagne and smiled. The cold, crisp liquid felt like an absolute victory. Every single time he uploaded a fake document or clicked the next button, he was adding another 5 to 10 years to his inevitable federal prison sentence. He was completely blinded by his own arrogance and his desperate need to maintain the illusion of his wealth. Then the banking system threw the ultimate roadblock onto his screen. It was the exact trap Elena had engineered perfectly for this moment. A bright, red warning banner flashed across his laptop and mirrored perfectly onto my tracking dashboard. The text read, "Transaction flagged pending approval from the estate executor." I imagined Hunter sitting at my beautiful quartz kitchen island, staring at that red warning banner, in absolute frustration. He was probably sweating through his expensive tailored suit. He was completely unaware that the Silas Harrison Estate Trust even existed, so the word executor meant absolutely nothing to him. He probably assumed it was just a generic banking error or an annoying glitch in the automated fraud prevention software. A smart lawyer would have stopped right there. A smart lawyer would have realized that he was triggering a major federal compliance review and backed away from the keyboard entirely before the authorities were notified. But Hunter was not a smart lawyer. He was an arrogant, desperate man who firmly believed he was the absolute smartest person in any room he ever walked into. He believed he was untouchable simply because he wore a nice watch and carried a law degree. The digital tracking log showed him completely ignoring the warning banner. He aggressively clicked the manual override button. The system prompted him one final time, asking him to legally certify under penalty of perjury that he possessed the full executive authority to move the requested funds. This was the point of no return. This was the exact moment where the action escalated from a minor civil dispute into a major federal felony involving wire fraud, identity theft, and international banking manipulation. The digital cursor hovered over the final authorize button for what felt like an eternity. I held my breath, setting my champagne glass down on the heavy mahogany coffee table. The suite at the Four Seasons was completely silent, except for the faint hum of the city traffic 14 floors below. I knew Sasha was probably in the master bedroom right now trying on my bespoke suits, and Yvonne was probably measuring the living room windows for new drapes. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their golden son-in-law was busy destroying all of their lives from the kitchen counter. Then the screen on my laptop blinked solid green. He clicked it. A massive string of data flooded my dashboard as the forged documents, the false signatures, and the illegal routing requests were instantly locked into the banking server's permanent, unalterable archive. The trap snapped shut with a deafening digital finality. There was no undo button for what he had just done. My phone buzzed softly on the table. It was Elena. I answered it and put her on speakerphone. "We got him," Elena said, her voice radiating a cold, clinical satisfaction that matched my own. "The Federal Cybercrimes Division has been monitoring the decoy server for the last 20 minutes. He just pushed the $500,000 transfer through using forged federal documents. The crime is officially complete, and the digital footprint is entirely undeniable." I leaned back against the plush velvet cushions and looked up at the ceiling, feeling a massive crushing weight finally lift off my chest. "What happens now?" I asked softly. "Now we let them celebrate," Elena replied, her tone sharp and precise. "We let Hunter think he actually got away with it. We let the fake money reflect as pending in his personal accounts, so his massive ego inflates even further. They are going to feel invincible for the next few days, and then we are going to invite them to the Global Financial Gala on Saturday night, and we are going to burn their entire world straight to the ground in front of everyone they desperately want to impress." I ended the call and slowly closed my laptop. The war of my childhood was officially over. They just did not know they had already lost. I walked over to the sprawling king-size bed, pulled back the crisp white sheets, and finally went to sleep. Exactly 1 week later, the Global Financial Gala took over the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel in Buckhead. It was the single most exclusive event of the year for the Atlanta elite. Billionaires, corporate titans, and the top legal minds in the state gathered under massive crystal chandeliers to network and celebrate their unimaginable wealth. It was exactly the kind of room my family had spent their entire lives desperately trying to crawl into. Thanks to Hunter's status as a junior partner, his real estate law firm had purchased 2 tables near the back of the room. Hunter managed to secure 4 tickets for his family under the pretense of impressing potential clients. I watched them enter the ballroom from my private VP balcony on the 2nd floor. They looked exactly like people who were trying way too hard to look rich. Yvonne was wearing a sequined dress that was far too loud for a corporate gala, clutching a glass of champagne like it was a prop in a movie. Otis was squeezed into a rented tuxedo, looking around the room with wide, greedy eyes. Sasha was practically glowing with unearned arrogance, wearing one of the stolen Hermes bags on her arm and a brand new diamond necklace that Hunter had undoubtedly purchased using the fake pending funds from his massive wire fraud. They walked through the crowd with their noses turned up, completely convinced that they had finally arrived at the peak of high society. Hunter was working the room, shaking hands with older men and laughing a little too loudly at their jokes. He thought he was completely untouchable. In his mind, the $500,000 wire transfer had gone through perfectly because the bank portal told him his transaction was approved. He had no idea that the money was sitting in a federal holding account, being carefully analyzed by cybercrime investigators. He was living in a beautiful digital fantasy where he was a brilliant legal mastermind who had successfully stolen a fortune and evicted his annoying sister-in-law without a single consequence. I turned away from the balcony railing and walked back into the private dressing suite. Elena was sitting on a velvet sofa, going over the final sequence of events for the evening. She looked up and smiled as my styling team finished the last touches on my hair. I was not wearing a cheap vintage coat tonight. I was wearing a custom-made floor-length emerald green silk gown tailored perfectly to my measurements by a famous designer in Paris. Around my neck was a simple but incredibly rare diamond pendant that had belonged to my biological grandmother. I looked powerful. I looked like the sole heir to a massive tech fortune. I looked exactly like the woman they had spent 33 years trying to keep hidden in the shadows. "It is time," Elena said softly, checking her diamond watch. The keynote presentation begins in 20 minutes. They are all seated at table 42 near the kitchen exits. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of pure, icy adrenaline rush through my veins. I thanked the styling team, picked up my matching emerald clutch, and walked out of the suite. I did not take the private service elevator this time. I walked directly down the grand, sweeping marble staircase that led right into the center of the main ballroom. The moment my heel touched the bottom step, heads began to turn. The Atlanta financial community knew exactly who I was. I was the strategic consultant who had saved 3 of their massive corporations from hostile takeovers just last year. A few senior partners from major investment firms nodded respectfully as I walked past. A banking CEO raised his glass to me from across the room. I smiled politely, acknowledging my actual peers as I glided across the plush-patterned carpet. I was about halfway across the room when the inevitable happened. A loud, sharp gasp cut through the polite jazz music playing in the background. I stopped and slowly turned my head. Standing about 20 feet away by the champagne fountain was Sasha. Her face was completely drained of color, and her jaw had practically unhinged. She was staring at my emerald silk gown and the dazzling diamonds resting against my collarbone. She blinked rapidly, rubbing her eyes as if she were looking at a terrifying mirage. Sasha grabbed Hunter's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. She pointed a shaking finger directly at me. Hunter turned his head, his arrogant smile freezing instantly on his face. Yvonne and Otis stopped talking to a polite older couple and followed Sasha's pointing finger. The entire fake family stared at me in absolute frozen horror. Their brains simply could not process the visual information. As far as they were concerned, I was a broke, homeless criminal who was currently living on the streets after being legally evicted from her rented apartment. They could not fathom how I had managed to bypass the strict security at $1,000 a plate gala looking like a billionaire. Sasha's shock quickly mutated into a violently ugly rage. The deep-seated jealousy she had harbored toward me her entire life exploded right there next to the champagne fountain. She dropped Hunter's arm and began marching directly across the ballroom floor toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble tiles. Hunter scrambled after her, trying to grab her elbow, but she shook him off. Yvonne and Otis trailed closely behind them, looking around nervously as other wealthy guests began to notice the incoming commotion. Sasha stopped right in front of me, planting her hands on her hips. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with absolute venom and disbelief. "What are you doing here, Jordan?" She hissed, her voice a loud, harsh whisper that echoed perfectly in the quiet space between us. "How did you even get past the front doors? Did you sneak in through the catering kitchen?" I looked at her with a calm, serene expression, perfectly unbothered by her aggressive posture. "Good evening, Sasha," I said softly. "It is a lovely night for a celebration, is it not?" Hunter stepped up next to his wife. His face flushed dark red with anger and embarrassment. He leaned in close to my face, trying to use his height to intimidate me, just like he had in my kitchen a week ago. "Listen to me very carefully, you crazy thief," he spat through clenched teeth. "You do not belong here. This event is for corporate professionals and high-net-worth individuals, not broke criminals who sleep on their friends' couches. You are going to turn around and walk right back out those doors right now, or I am calling the head of security to have you physically dragged out of this ballroom in front of all these important people." Sasha smirked, a nasty, triumphant little smile forming on her lips. "You heard him?" she mocked, waving her hand dismissively. "Go find a soup kitchen, Jordan. You are embarrassing us just by breathing the same air." Yvonne stepped forward, her eyes locked onto my diamond pendant, clearly calculating how much she could sell it for. "Take that stolen necklace off right now," Yvonne demanded, her voice shaking with greed. "You probably stole that from your employer too. Give it to your sister before we have you arrested." I stood my ground, completely surrounded by my toxic family, right in the middle of the most prestigious room in the city. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I just waited for the trap to snap perfectly shut. The tension in the room thickens rapidly as Sasha realizes I am not intimidated by her sudden ambush. She raises her voice deliberately, trying to create a massive public spectacle. She wants everyone in the VIP lounge to hear her. She starts yelling about how I am a broke squatter who just got legally kicked out of my apartment. The wealthy guests around us stop their polite conversations and turn to watch the drama unfold. Yvonne is still staring at my diamond pendant, muttering loudly about how I must have pawned stolen corporate property just to rent a fancy dress for the night. Otis is nervously adjusting his rented tuxedo collar, realizing that the eyes of the Atlanta financial elite are now glued to our little family reunion. Hunter decides this is his ultimate moment to shine. He wants to prove to his senior law partners who are sitting just a few tables away that he is a man of decisive action and unwavering authority. He steps right into my personal space, his face contorted with aggressive arrogance. "You are a delusional fraud, Jordan." He spits the words out like poison. "You think putting on a fake silk dress makes you one of us? You are nothing but a common thief, and I am not going to let you embarrass my family or my firm any longer." He reaches out his large hand, clamping down hard on my bare shoulder, grabbing the silk strap of my emerald gown. He tries to physically pull me toward the service exit. I do not resist his pull, but I do not move either. I just look down at his hand gripping my dress and then back up at his red, sweating face. "Let go of me, Hunter," I say, my voice dangerously quiet and perfectly steady. It is the kind of quiet that commands absolute attention in a crowded room. But Hunter is completely blinded by his own inflated ego and his desperate need to be the hero of Sasha's fabricated narrative. He tightens his grip, digging his fingers into my collarbone. "I said you are leaving," he growls, pulling harder. Sasha is standing right behind him, crossing her arms and smiling a wicked little smile, thoroughly enjoying what she thinks is my ultimate public humiliation. Suddenly, the crowd of wealthy onlookers parts like the Red Sea. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a pristine black suit wearing a discreet earpiece steps through the circle of elite guests. It is the head of security for the St. Regis Hotel. Hunter sees him coming and immediately puffs out his chest, assuming the guard is responding to the disturbance to help him maintain order. "Thank God," Hunter says loudly, letting go of my shoulder and waving the security chief over. "Officer, you need to remove this woman immediately. She is a known corporate embezzler who crashed this private gala. She does not have a ticket, and she is actively harassing my family." Sasha chimes in immediately, her voice dripping with fake victimhood. "She has been stalking us all night." She lies, dramatically pressing her manicured hand to her chest. "She is completely unhinged and dangerous. Please get her out of here before she hurts someone or damages the property." Yvonne nods vigorously, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "Check her pockets," Yvonne demands greedily, stepping closer to the guard. "I guarantee she has been stealing silverware and wallets from the tables while nobody was looking." The head of security does not even look at Hunter. He does not acknowledge Sasha or Yvonne. He steps right past them, entirely ignoring their frantic, desperate accusations. He stops exactly 2 feet in front of me, stands perfectly straight, and bows his head slightly in a gesture of profound, absolute respect. The entire VIP lounge falls completely silent. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpet. "Is this man bothering you, Mom?" the security chief asks, his deep voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "Do you need me to have him and his party escorted off the premises immediately?" The collective gasp from my family is practically deafening. Hunter drops his hand, his jaw falling completely slack as if the hinges just broke. Sasha looks like she has just been physically struck by a heavy, blunt object. Yvonne and Otis freeze, completely paralyzed by the impossible reality unfolding right in front of their eyes. The security chief of the most exclusive event in the city just bowed to the daughter they threw away like absolute trash. Hunter is the first to recover from the initial shock, but his brain completely misinterprets the situation. His arrogance simply will not allow him to comprehend that I might actually possess genuine power or status. "Wait, you do not understand?" Hunter stammers, his voice cracking slightly with panic. He points at me again, his finger trembling. She is not a VIP guest. She is my broke sister-in-law. She lives in a tiny apartment. She is a fraud. She forged her way in here to steal from these people. You are talking to the wrong person, officer. You are making a massive mistake. Sasha immediately doubles down, refusing to let go of her false reality. Yes, you need to do your job, Sasha shrieks, pointing at the security chief's chest, her face turning an ugly shade of purple. My husband is a junior partner at a top real estate law firm. He bought a table here. We belong here. She is just a pathetic liar who wants to ruin my night because she is jealous of my new house and my success. Drag her out of here right now, or my husband will sue this hotel for everything it is worth. The security chief finally turns his head to look at Hunter and Sasha. His expression is completely cold and entirely unbothered by their empty, pathetic threats. He taps his earpiece, listening for a brief second before locking his hard eyes with Hunter. Sir, the chief says, his tone entirely flat and strictly professional. This woman is not a party crasher. She is the primary platinum sponsor of tonight's global financial gala. She also happens to own the majority shares of the corporate management group that holds the deed to this very hotel. So I will ask her one more time if she would like you removed from her property. The blood completely drains from Hunter's face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. His eyes dart wildly around the room, realizing that several of his senior law partners have walked over and are watching this entire disastrous exchange. Sasha takes a physical step backward, her designer heels stumbling slightly on the plush carpet as the breath is completely knocked out of her lungs. Yvonne grabs Otis by the arm, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish suffocating on dry land. The entire room of billionaires and corporate elites is watching them self-destruct in real time. The silence is absolute and incredibly heavy with their impending doom. I look at the security chief and give him a small, graceful smile. No, thank you, I say softly, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent, breathless ballroom. Let them stay. They have a front row seat for the keynote presentation, and I would absolutely hate for them to miss the show. The security chief gave me one final respectful nod before stepping back into the shadows of the ballroom. I turned away from my frozen family and walked gracefully toward the front of the room where the platinum sponsors were seated. The heavy crystal chandeliers above us began to slowly dim, signaling the start of the keynote presentation. The murmurs of the wealthy crowd settled down as everyone found their seats. I took my place at a prime table right in the center of the front row, sipping my water and waiting for the final act of this tragedy to unfold. Back at table 42, Hunter was desperately trying to glue his shattered ego back together. From my vantage point, I could see him leaning across the table, whispering furiously to Sasha and my parents. I knew exactly what he was saying. His arrogant brain simply could not accept that I had beaten him, so he was busy inventing a new reality. He was probably telling them that I had bribed the security guard or that I was running an elaborate corporate scam that was about to collapse. Yvonne and Otis looked physically ill, picking nervously at their expensive salads, while Sasha kept glaring at the back of my head with a mixture of intense hatred and deep confusion. A smooth voice echoed over the state-of-the-art sound system, introducing the evening's keynote speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Senior Partner and Chief Executive of Private Wealth Management, Elena Rollins. The crowd erupted into polite applause. Elena walked onto the grand stage, her silver hair gleaming under the bright spotlights. She wore a sharp, tailored navy suit that projected absolute authority. She stepped up to the clear acrylic podium and adjusted the microphone. Down at table 42, Hunter suddenly sat up completely straight. He recognized her name and the name of her firm from the legal paperwork he had forged earlier that week. He looked around at the senior law partners sitting at his table and puffed out his chest, leaning in to share what he thought was incredibly insider information. I know her firm, Hunter bragged in a loud whisper that carried over the quiet jazz music. We actually do a lot of backdoor real estate business together. In fact, I am finalizing a massive contract with her office this week to manage some of their blind family trusts. She is brilliant, but she relies on guys like me to handle the heavy legal lifting. The senior partners at his table nodded politely, entirely unaware that the man sitting next to them was a desperate criminal who had just committed federal wire fraud. Hunter leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and smiling smugly, completely convinced that he was about to be validated in front of the entire Atlanta financial elite. On stage, Elena looked out over the sea of faces, her sharp eyes scanning the room until they briefly locked with mine. She gave me the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. "Good evening, Elena," began her voice echoing powerfully through the massive ballroom. "Tonight we are gathered to celebrate wealth strategy and corporate growth, but at the very core of wealth management is a much deeper principle. That principle is trust. It is the sacred duty to protect the legacy of those who are no longer with us and to safeguard the futures of those who cannot yet protect themselves." The room was captivated. Elena commanded the stage with an effortless gravity. "Tonight is a historic night for my firm," she continued, pacing slowly across the stage. 33 years ago, a pioneer in the tech industry named Silas Harrison came to me with a desperate request. He knew his life was in danger, and he needed to hide his newborn daughter from his corporate enemies. He established a massive financial vehicle known internally as the Vanguard Trust to provide for her care until she was old enough to claim her rightful inheritance. The massive digital screens behind the stage suddenly lit up. The guests murmured in quiet awe as the staggering total valuation of the Vanguard Trust was briefly displayed on the screens. It was a number so large it made even the billionaires in the room sit up and pay attention. "But a trust is only as secure as the people you pay to maintain it," Elena said, her tone dropping to a cold, clinical register. Silas Harrison paid a young married couple $20,000 a month to take his daughter in, to give her a loving home and to keep her safe. They were given one single job: to love and protect a child. The screens flashed and the image changed. It was no longer a corporate logo or a financial chart. It was a highly detailed forensic audit. Instead of providing care, Elena's voice cut through the silent room like a razor blade. They treated the child like an unpaid servant. They forced her to live in poverty while they systematically drained the monthly stipends to fund their own lavish lifestyles. They stole her childhood, they stole her education, and they stole her peace of mind. The massive screens shifted again, displaying high-resolution photographs of Yvonne and Otis. Right next to their faces were blown-up copies of their bank statements, canceled checks, and fraudulent tax returns, spanning over 3 decades. Every single luxury purchase, Otis's failed car dealerships, Yvonne's country club memberships, and the massive lump sum that paid off Hunter's law school debt was highlighted in bright, damning red ink. At table 42, the senior law partners stopped breathing. They stared at the massive screens and then slowly turned their heads to look directly at Yvonne and Otis, who were sitting frozen in their rented formal wear. Otis began to sweat profusely, wiping his forehead with a cloth napkin while his hands shook violently. Yvonne looked like she was about to vomit, hiding her face behind her sequined clutch. Sasha stared at the screens in absolute horror, finally realizing that the childhood she thought she deserved was actually bought with stolen money. The golden child was completely funded by the sister she had spent her entire life mocking and abusing. And Hunter, his arrogant bragging, suddenly turned to ash in his mouth. The senior partners at his table were now glaring at him, connecting the dots between his loud claims of knowing Elena's firm and the massive financial crimes currently being broadcast to the entire city. His face went completely pale. He tried to sink lower into his chair, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. For 33 years, these two individuals operated under the delusion that their crimes would remain buried in the shadows, Elena announced, pointing directly at the detailed audit on the screen. But the Vanguard Trust was unsealed this morning. The shadow account is officially closed, and the forensic accounting of their profound betrayal is now a matter of public federal record. The entire ballroom erupted into shocked whispers and loud murmurs. The Atlanta elite loved nothing more than a spectacular public scandal, and my fake family had just been served up on a silver platter. I sat in the front row, sipping my water and watching the screens. The 33-year embezzlement was finally exposed to the sunlight, but Elena was not even close to being finished. The audit was just the appetizer, and the main course was about to be served directly to the arrogant lawyer who thought he could outsmart us all. Elena did not give the crowd time to recover from the initial shock. She tapped the small black remote in her hand, and the massive digital screens shifted again. This time, the forensic audit zoomed in on the final staggering calculation. The numbers glowed in bright white against the dark background, illuminating the absolute depth of my fake family's greed. Elena's voice was completely devoid of sympathy as she explained the brutal mathematics of their crime. For 33 years, she announced the Vanguard Trust disbursed exactly $20,000 on the first of every month. If you simply add the principal, that is a theft of nearly $8 million. The ballroom was dead silent. Even the waitstaff had stopped pouring champagne to watch the spectacle. However, Elena continued, Silas Harrison was a brilliant man who anticipated the greed of others. The Shadow Trust was structured with a strict penalizing interest rate for any unauthorized diversion of funds. With 33 years of aggressively compounding interest and severe legal penalties, the total amount owed to the estate is not $8 million. The screen flashed to the final total. $25 million. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. $25 million was not just bankruptcy for people like Yvonne and Otis. It was generational ruin. It was a debt so massive they could sell every single asset they possessed and still spend the rest of their miserable lives paying it off. Elena gestured toward the back of the room. Two men in sharp gray suits stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen doors. They were not hotel security, they were federal process servers. They walked with absolute purpose directly toward table 42. The entire ballroom watched in breathless silence as the men reached the table. One of the men dropped a massive legal binder directly onto the center of the table, knocking over a crystal water glass. The water spilled across the white linen tablecloth, soaking into Yvonne's expensive dinner napkin. Yvonne Vance. The man said, his voice loud enough to carry to the surrounding tables. You are hereby legally served on behalf of the Vanguard Trust. All of your personal banking accounts, real estate holdings and retirement funds were officially frozen by a federal judge at 5 o'clock this evening. You have exactly 14 days to produce $25 million, or you will face immediate criminal prosecution for grand larceny and wire fraud. Yvonne stared at the massive binder as if it were a ticking bomb. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her skin a sickening shade of gray. She looked around the room, seeing the disgusted faces of the Atlanta elite looking down at her. The people she had spent decades trying to impress were now staring at her like she was a disgusting insect. She tried to speak, to formulate some kind of defense, but only a strangled wheezing sound came out of her throat. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed sideways, tumbling out of her chair and hitting the plush carpet with a heavy, dull thud. Sasha screamed, but she did not immediately drop to the floor to help her mother. She was too busy staring at the binder, her mind frantically processing the words frozen assets. She realized in a split second that her parents' money, the money that funded her car, her house, and her entire identity was completely gone. The golden child was officially broke. Otis did not even look down at his unconscious wife. The sheer primal panic of facing federal prison completely overtook whatever tiny amount of loyalty he possessed. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward onto the floor. He looked wildly around the room, breathing heavily like a trapped animal. He locked his eyes on the service exit doors just 20 feet away and bolted. He tried to run past the champagne fountain, pushing a waiter out of the way, but he did not even make it 10 steps. The broad-shouldered security chief who had bowed to me earlier stepped effortlessly into his path. Otis slammed into the security chief's chest like a bird hitting a solid pane of glass and bounced backward, falling hard onto his hands and knees. "Sit down, sir!" The security chief commanded, his voice like thunder. "The police are already on their way." The absolute chaos at table 42 was a spectacular public disaster. I sat in the front row, completely motionless, watching the glorious collapse of the people who had tortured me for 3 decades. I did not feel a single ounce of pity when Yvonne hit the floor. I only felt a profound sense of justice. My entire life, they had told me I was a burden. They told me I was a waste of space, taking up resources in their perfect home. But the truth was finally out in the open. They were the parasites. They were the leeches who had attached themselves to my biological father's wealth and sucked it dry. Despite the complete destruction of his in-laws, Hunter simply could not stay quiet. His entire identity was built on being the smartest lawyer in the room. The senior partners at his firm were sitting right next to him, watching the family he married into completely self-destruct. Hunter jumped to his feet, his face flushed purple with unhinged rage. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Elena, who was standing calmly on the grand stage watching the pathetic scene unfold. "This is absolute garbage," Hunter screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "This is textbook defamation. You cannot just project fake documents on a screen and accuse my family of federal crimes. I am a junior partner at a top-tier firm and I will sue you, Elena Rollins. I will sue your entire wealth management firm for slander, libel, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You have no proof. You are relying on forged documents provided by a bitter, jealous woman. My in-laws are upstanding citizens, and you are going to pay millions for dragging their names through the mud tonight." Hunter kept screaming, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. He was trying to use legal buzzwords to intimidate Elena, trying to prove to his senior partners that he was still a competent attorney who had this situation completely under control. "We have a signed asset transfer agreement," Hunter yelled, waving his arms frantically. "We have legal documents proving that Jordan is the one who has been stealing. You are backing the wrong horse, Elena. I will have your law license revoked by the State Bar Association first thing tomorrow morning." The senior partners at Hunter's table looked at him with absolute disgust. One of them, an older man with silver hair, slowly stood up and took 2 steps away from Hunter, physically distancing himself from the toxic fallout. Hunter noticed the movement, and his panic deepened. He looked at his boss, desperately trying to gain his support. "Sir, you have to believe me," Hunter pleaded, his voice dropping from a scream to a pathetic whine. "My sister-in-law is a master manipulator. She fabricated this entire trust story to get back at us because she is broke." Elena stood at the podium perfectly still. She did not interrupt Hunter's frantic screaming. She let him completely empty his lungs, letting him dig his grave as deep as he possibly could in front of the most powerful people in the city. When Hunter finally stopped yelling, his chest heaving and his face covered in sweat, Elena simply leaned closer to the microphone. "Are you quite finished, Mr. Hunter?" she asked, her voice echoing with chilling precision. "Because while you are so desperately eager to threaten me with civil lawsuits regarding defamation, I think you need to focus your immediate attention on a much more pressing matter: your own criminal defense." Elena tapped the remote one more time. "You claim to be a brilliant legal mind, Mr. Hunter," she said, looking down at him from the stage. "So let us take a look at exactly how brilliant you really are." The massive digital screens behind Elena flickered and changed. The forensic audit of Yvonne and Otis vanished completely and was instantly replaced by a stark, high-resolution image of a secure banking portal. Hunter stopped breathing entirely. His eyes widened into massive circles of absolute panic as he recognized the exact digital interface he had been staring at on my encrypted laptop in the penthouse just a few days ago. Elena's voice cut through the silent ballroom like a surgical scalpel slicing effortlessly through his fragile, inflated ego. "Mr. Hunter, you just claimed to this entire room that you possess a legally binding asset transfer agreement," she said, pointing a slender finger at the glowing screen. "What you actually possess is a forged document that you uploaded directly to a federally monitored honeypot server built specifically by my cybersecurity team to catch you in the act of committing federal wire fraud. The screen zoomed in on the document Hunter had uploaded earlier that week. My forged signature was displayed in massive black ink for the entire Atlanta financial elite to see. Right next to it was the damning digital tracking log, showing the exact IP address, the specific timestamp, and the device registration used to initiate the massive transfer. Elena walked casually across the stage, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood. "You see, ladies and gentlemen?" Elena addressed the captivated crowd. Mr. Hunter was not satisfied with simply legally evicting my client from her own home based on fabricated evidence. He decided to use his newly forged power of attorney to initiate an international wire transfer of $500,000. The massive screens flashed again, showing the pending wire transfer request. But Elena was not finished destroying him. She tapped the small black remote, and a second set of financial ledgers appeared right next to the wire transfer data. These ledgers bore the official embossed logo of Hunter's highly prestigious real estate law firm. The senior partners sitting at table 42 suddenly leaned forward, their faces turning a sickening shade of pale with genuine corporate panic. Mr. Hunter did not just try to steal $500,000 from the Vanguard Trust. Elena explained, her voice completely devoid of any human mercy. My team of forensic accountants discovered that for the past 18 months, he has been systematically siphoning millions of dollars out of his own law firm's client escrow accounts. He used stolen client trust money to secretly fund his wife's luxury vehicles, her month-long European vacations, and the massive cash down payment on her sprawling suburban mansion. The ballroom immediately erupted into a chaotic frenzy of shocked whispers and loud gasps. Stealing from family was a dirty scandal, but stealing from client escrow accounts was the ultimate, unforgivable sin in this room full of corporate professionals. The silver-haired senior partner sitting at Hunter's table stood up so fast his heavy wooden dining chair crashed violently backward onto the marble floor. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He did not care about causing a public scene anymore. He only cared about saving his firm from the catastrophic legal fallout of Hunter's massive federal crimes. Hunter, the senior partner, bellowed, his deep voice shaking with uncontrollable rage. "You are completely finished. As of this exact second, your partnership is permanently revoked. You are fired. You are a complete disgrace to this law firm and to the entire legal profession." The older man pulled out his cell phone, his hands trembling with anger as he stared down at the man he had once mentored. "Our internal compliance officers are dialing the FBI Cybercrimes Division right now. Do not even think about coming back to the office to clear out your desk. Your career is completely dead." Hunter's entire world shattered in a fraction of a second. The arrogant, aggressive white knight lawyer who had aggressively grabbed my shoulder and threatened to throw me out onto the cold street was gone. His legs literally gave out beneath the weight of his own hubris. He collapsed onto the plush patterned carpet, landing hard on his knees right in front of his former boss. "Please, sir." Hunter sobbed loudly, his voice breaking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine that carried across the quiet room. "Please, you have to listen to me. I can fix this. I can pay all the money back. I swear." "It was not my fault." Hunter aggressively turned his head and pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at Sasha, who was standing frozen in absolute horror. "She made me do it," Hunter cried uncontrollably, tears streaming down his flushed, sweaty face. "She is completely obsessed with money and status. She demanded the new house and the expensive cars. She told me I was not a real man if I could not provide the luxury lifestyle she deserved. I only took the client money to keep her happy and stop her from leaving me. Please do not let them call the federal authorities." Sasha stumbled backward, clutching her stolen authentic Hermes bag to her chest, as if the leather could somehow protect her from the absolute destruction of her perfect life. "How could you say that about me?" Sasha shrieked, her voice cracking with wild hysteria. "You are the one who stole the money from your own clients. You are a disgusting criminal." The beautiful golden child and her perfect wealthy husband were violently turning on each other right there on the ballroom floor, tearing each other apart like wild animals trapped in a sinking cage. Elena watched them from the grand stage for a long, deliberate moment, letting the elite crowd completely absorb the pathetic reality of their true toxic nature. Elena stepped back to the clear acrylic podium, tapping the microphone once to bring the chaotic room back to absolute silence. The broad-shouldered security chief and his team had moved in much closer to table 42, forming a quiet perimeter to ensure that neither Hunter nor Otis could attempt another frantic escape while they waited for the Atlanta Police Department to arrive. Yvonne had finally regained consciousness and was sitting awkwardly on the floor, leaning against a table leg, weeping hysterically into her shaking hands. Their brutal public execution was complete, but the final massive revelation of the night had not yet been delivered to the waiting crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elena said, her voice smooth and incredibly powerful, sweeping over the completely captivated audience. 33 years ago, Silas Harrison built the Vanguard Shadow Trust to protect his only biological child from the exact kind of blinding greed and vicious betrayal you have all witnessed here tonight. He wanted her to grow up strong, incredibly resilient, and perfectly capable of managing the massive global empire he left behind. Looking at the woman she has become, I can confidently say that she has exceeded every single one of his expectations. It is my profound professional honor to formally unseal the Vanguard Trust and properly introduce its sole beneficiary and the new permanent chairwoman of the Harrison estate. Elena turned gracefully toward the front row, extending her hand in an elegant gesture of deep respect. I stood up from my front row seat. The heavy emerald silk of my custom-tailored gown caught the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers as I walked slowly and deliberately up the sweeping carpeted stairs to the grand stage. The entire ballroom watched me in absolute stunned silence. The wealthy elite billionaires who had casually nodded to me earlier in the evening suddenly realized that the brilliant financial strategist they had hired to save their failing companies was secretly one of the wealthiest women in the entire country. I reached the acrylic podium and Elena stepped aside, giving me the undisputed center stage. I looked out over the massive sea of faces, my heart beating with a steady, perfectly calm rhythm. I did not feel angry or bitter anymore. I felt entirely free. My eyes purposefully bypassed the billionaires and the corporate titans in the front rows and locked directly onto table 42 near the kitchen doors. Otis was staring up at me, his jaw hanging wide open in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Yvonne was shaking her head rapidly back and forth, as if trying to violently wake herself up from an impossible nightmare. Sasha looked like all the oxygen had been permanently sucked out of her lungs, leaving her gasping for air. And Hunter was still kneeling pathetically on the carpet, his tear-stained face looking up at me with absolute terrified realization of exactly who he had tried to extort. "Good evening," I said, my voice echoing flawlessly and coldly through the silent ballroom. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight to witness the closing of a very long and incredibly painful chapter of my life." I looked directly down at Hunter, forcing him to hold my gaze. "You told me earlier tonight that I did not belong in this prestigious room, Hunter. You told me I was a broke, delusional squatter who needed to be violently evicted from family property. What you did not know is that the commercial skyscraper your former law firm currently leases in downtown Atlanta was quietly purchased by my corporate holding company last month. So technically, you are the one trespassing on my property tonight." The senior partners sitting nearby gasped audibly, and Hunter buried his face deep in his hands, sobbing loudly into his palms. I slowly shifted my icy gaze to Yvonne and Otis, who were cowering together on the floor, looking like terrified mice. "For 33 years, you treated me like an unwanted, unpaid servant," I said, my voice perfectly steady, carrying the heavy weight of a judge delivering an inescapable final sentence. "You actively stole my real father's money to build a fake life of luxury, and you constantly reminded me that my very existence was a heavy burden on your perfect family. The $25 million debt you now legally owe to the Vanguard Trust will never be forgiven or settled. My aggressive legal team will systematically seize every single asset you currently possess, including the rented clothes you are wearing tonight. You will spend the rest of your miserable lives trying to repay a tiny fraction of what you stole from me. Finally, I turned my head and looked directly at Sasha. The beautiful, adored golden child was trembling violently, her perfectly styled blonde hair falling into her ruined, tear-streaked face. The profound jealousy and vicious entitlement that had driven her entire existence had completely destroyed her reality. You always wanted to be the only center of attention, Sasha, I said softly. But the microphone carried every single syllable with crystal clarity. You threw me away at a restaurant last week because you proudly announced that the main table was only for immediate family. You told me to go find an overflow table hiding in the shadows next to the kitchen doors. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch out across the massive room, letting the absolute brutal finality of this moment sink deep into her bones. Well, Sasha, I continued, my voice dropping to a sharp, chilling whisper that echoed off the high ceiling. You wanted the overflow table. You can have it. For the rest of your life. I stepped back from the acrylic podium, turning my back on them forever. The entire ballroom instantly erupted into a massive, deafening standing ovation. The loud, thunderous applause rolled through the grand space, a massive wave of validation and deep respect from the very people my fake family had spent their entire lives worshipping. I walked gracefully off the stage with Elena right by my side, leaving Yvonne, Otis, Sasha, and Hunter waiting helplessly for the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers that were already pulling up to the front glass doors of the luxury hotel. The 33-year nightmare was officially over, and my real beautiful life was finally ready to begin. The grand mahogany doors of the ballroom closed behind me, muting the sound of the thunderous applause. I walked out into the massive marble lobby of the St. Regis Hotel, the cool air conditioning a welcome relief from the heat of the stage. Elena walked right beside me, her expression calm and satisfied. Trailing several yards behind us, escorted firmly by the hotel security team, was the complete wreckage of my former family. They spilled out into the lobby like a slow-moving car crash. Sasha was the first to completely break. The shock had worn off, and the blinding reality of her new absolute poverty hit her like a physical blow. She stopped in the middle of the expensive lobby carpet and spun around to face Hunter. She looked at the man she had married entirely for his money and status, realizing he was nothing but a broke criminal who had just cost her everything. "You lied to me!" Sasha screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls and drawing the attention of the hotel concierge and the valet staff. "You told me you were a powerful partner. You told me we were rich." Hunter tried to reach out for her, his hands shaking violently, but Sasha violently swatted him away. "Do not touch me, you fake, pathetic lawyer!" she shrieked. "You stole client money. You forged documents. We are going to lose the house and my car. You ruined my life." Sasha raised her hand and slapped Hunter across the face with all the strength she possessed. The sharp smack echoed loudly in the cavernous lobby, leaving a bright red handprint on Hunter's pale, sweating cheek. Hunter snapped. The arrogant man who always needed to be in control completely lost his mind. He pointed a shaking finger right back at Sasha and then aggressively turned his wrath toward Yvonne, who was still sobbing into her hands. "Do not you dare blame me for this!" Hunter yelled, his voice cracking with hysterical panic. "I only stole that money because your spoiled, psychotic daughter demanded a lifestyle I could not afford. And you, Yvonne, you are the one who hid the shadow trust. You raised a greedy monster, and you set me up to take the fall. If you had just told me about the estate, none of this would have happened." Otis, who had been silent since his pathetic attempt to run away, suddenly turned on his wife as well. He grabbed Yvonne by the arm, shaking her roughly. "You told me the money was secure," Otis bellowed, his face flushed with panicked rage. You told me the trust administrators would never audit those old accounts. We are $25 million in debt, Yvonne. We are going to die in federal prison because you could not control your own greed. Yvonne pushed Otis away, crying hysterically and screaming that she only did it to give them a good life. They stood in a tight circle in the middle of the luxury hotel lobby, tearing each other apart like rabid dogs fighting over a scrap of meat. There was no loyalty left. There was no love. The entire foundation of their family was built on stolen money, and the second the money vanished, the family violently imploded. Through the massive glass doors of the hotel entrance, I saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the dark pavement. 3 Atlanta Police Department cruisers pulled up to the valet stand blocking the driveway. 4 uniformed officers stepped out heavily armed and moving with absolute purpose. They walked through the sliding glass doors, completely ignoring the luxury surroundings. Hunter Vance, the lead officer, announced, his hand resting on his utility belt. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, grand larceny, and identity theft. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Hunter completely collapsed. He fell to his knees on the marble floor, sobbing and begging the officers, telling them it was a misunderstanding and that his mother-in-law was the real mastermind. The officers did not care. They pulled his arms roughly behind his back, and the cold, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the lobby, sealing his fate. Sasha backed away from him, crying uncontrollably, completely abandoning the man she swore to love in sickness and in health. I continued walking forward, my emerald gown sweeping across the floor, heading directly toward the front exit. Yvonne saw me coming. She broke away from Otis and threw herself directly into my path, falling heavily onto both of her knees. She reached out with her shaking hands, desperately grabbing the hem of my dress. "Jordan, please," Yvonne begged, her face covered in running mascara and tears. "Please, you have to stop this. We are your family. I am your mother. I raised you. I took care of you. You cannot do this to us. Please forgive me, Jordan. I will do anything. I will work for you. Just call off the lawyers." I stopped and looked down at the woman who had made my childhood a living nightmare. I looked at her tear-stained face and her desperate, pleading eyes. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger left, just a cold, profound emptiness where a daughter's love should have been. "You are not my mother, Yvonne," I said, my voice perfectly quiet and entirely devoid of emotion. "You were an employee who stole from her boss, and now you are fired." I gently but firmly pulled the silk fabric of my dress out of her grasping hands. I did not look back at her. I did not look at Sasha weeping in the corner or Hunter being dragged out in handcuffs. I walked out the glass doors into the cool Atlanta night, flanked by Elena and my security detail, leaving the wreckage of my past completely behind me. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air swept across the expansive balcony of my newly renovated midtown penthouse. The space looked entirely different now. I had completely redesigned the interior, ripping out everything that held the lingering memories of that morning when my fake family had tried to evict me. The space was now filled with warm light, modern art, and the sound of genuine laughter. Life has a very funny way of balancing the scales when you finally decide to stop protecting the people who hurt you. The fallout from the gala was swift and absolutely brutal. Hunter's massive federal wire fraud and embezzlement charges carried severe mandatory minimums. He pled guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial, and a federal judge sentenced him to 5 solid years in a medium-security penitentiary with no chance of early parole. His prestigious law firm completely erased all evidence that he had ever worked there. Sasha divorced him the exact same week he was indicted, claiming she was a victim of his financial abuse. But the family court system did not care about her tears. The forensic accountants seized everything. The suburban mansion, the brand new Porsche, the jewelry, and every single authentic Hermes bag she had stolen from my closet. It was all liquidated to pay back the stolen law firm escrow funds. Sasha, who had never worked a real day in her life, was forced to face actual reality. She now works 40 hours a week at a minimum wage retail job in a discount clothing store, folding sweaters and dealing with angry customers just to afford the rent on her tiny studio apartment. Yvonne and Otis suffered the absolute worst fate of all. They could not even come close to paying back the $25 million they owed the Vanguard Trust. My legal team systematically dismantled their entire life. Their house was foreclosed on by the bank. Their retirement accounts were drained and their luxury cars were repossessed. They were left with absolutely nothing. Last I heard, they moved into a cramped, run-down trailer park on the far outskirts of the city. They spend their days blaming each other for their total ruin, completely isolated, because all of their country club friends immediately cut ties with them the moment the scandal broke. I stood by the glass railing of my balcony, holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne, looking out at the glittering skyline. Tonight was my 34th birthday. For the first time in my entire life, I was actually celebrating it. The massive living room behind me was filled with people who genuinely cared about me. My corporate colleagues, the friends I had made along my journey, and Elena, who had become the closest thing to a real mother I had ever known. There were no overflow tables here. There was no one demanding I pay the bill or telling me I did not belong. I had built my own empire from the ground up, and I had reclaimed the legacy my biological father had left for me. Elena walked over to the balcony and stood next to me, clinking her glass gently against mine. "Happy birthday, Jordan," she said, smiling warmly. "Silas would be incredibly proud of the woman you are today." I took a sip of the champagne, feeling the cool bubbles dance on my tongue. "Thank you, Elena," I replied, looking out at the city lights. I turned to look directly at you, the audience sharing this journey with me. If there is one thing you take away from my story, let it be this: blood does not make a family. Shared DNA is not an absolute free pass for abuse, manipulation, or theft. Society will constantly tell you that you have to forgive your toxic relatives because they are family. They will tell you to keep the peace and accept the disrespect. Do not listen to them. You do not owe your peace of mind to the people who actively destroy it. You do not owe your hard-earned success to the people who tried to bury you in the dirt. When you finally find the courage to cut off the toxic bloodlines holding you back, you create the space to build your own empire. You create the space to find the people who will actually love you, celebrate you, and respect your boundaries. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own future? How did you find the strength to finally cut the ties? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that they are worth so much more than the overflow table. Thank you for watching, and remember, your real life begins the exact moment you decide you deserve better.